He was ready to live alone forever, until she knocked at his door. The wind on Atrian 9 was never silent. It hissed through the cracks in old mining equipment, curled between the broken ribs of refineries long since scavenged for metal, and carried with it the scent of ozone and scorched dust. In the pale lavender twilight, the wind took on a voice of its own, a low, hollow murmur that made the air feel haunted. Grant Keller didn't mind the wind. He didn't mind the silence either. In fact, he preferred it. He lived alone inside a converted terraforming dome on the edge of a ravine, the last remnant of a mining colony abandoned a decade ago. Half buried in sand and corroded memories, the dome still held air, warmth, water, and crops. That was enough. He kept to himself, spent most days maintaining the oxygen scrubbers and solar banks, and spent most nights with a book from his data tablet or the static hum of a weak radio signal no one else ever seemed to hear. He didn't need company, or that's what he had told himself for years. That evening the storm rolled in faster than expected. Static pressure climbed, and the sky darkened from amethyst to slate gray, dust clouds rising like smoke from the horizon. Grant pulled the outer dome seals early, double-checked the vents, and locked the hatch just as the first hard gusts slammed into the structure. It was nothing new. Storms were a part of life here. You sealed up, waited them out, and kept moving. He had just sat down with a bowl of reheated lentil stew when the sensor chimed. A soft tone from the panel above the main hatch, external movement detected. For a moment he thought it might be the wind blowing debris sometimes set it off, but the secondary monitor lit up with heat signatures. Two of them, one tall, one small. Grant stood slowly. He hadn't seen another soul in nearly 3 years. He approached the console, tapping through grainy visuals. The storm obscured most of the camera's view, but the figures were there, moving through the haze. One was humanoid, tall, lean, but unsteady. The other barely reached the adult's waist. A child. They staggered toward the dome's outer pressure chamber, hands shielding their faces from the dust. Grant's heart was already thudding harder than he liked. His first instinct was caution. Could be scavengers. Could be pirates. Could be a distraction while someone circled around the back of the dome. But no one circled. The dome's motion grid stayed silent. Only the two, moving slower now, dragging themselves toward shelter. He grabbed his pulse pistol from the wall but didn't power it on. Not yet. He waited at the inner door as the knock came soft but desperate. 3 quick raps, then nothing. He toggled the intercom. "This is a sealed shelter," he said, voice level. "Identify yourself." No answer. A pause. Then a woman's voice, hoarse, nearly broken. "Please, one night, just let my son eat." Grant hesitated, hand hovering over the controls. The child. That word hit him harder than it should have. He keyed open the airlock chamber and watched the readout cycle. The inner door hissed open. Dust blew in first, and then they followed. The woman stepped in first, barefoot, tall, thin, too thin, wearing what looked like scavenged cloth wrapped around her chest and hips. Her skin was a muted lilac shade, streaked with silver markings and dirt, her hair long and tangled. Behind her, a small boy stumbled in, no older than 5 or 6, eyes barely open, face sunburnt and lips cracked. The woman's knees buckled and she caught herself against the wall. "Just one night," she rasped. "I can give you whatever you want. Just feed him, please." She didn't look up when she said it. Her voice didn't carry seduction. It carried resignation, like she had offered that bargain before. Grant said nothing for a moment. He studied her, not her body, but the way she held the boy, protective. The child weighed nothing. His limbs were stick-thin. He didn't speak, just clung to her skirt, barely conscious. "You don't have to give me anything," Grant said finally. Then he stepped aside and opened the door. She froze. It took her 3 long breaths before she moved. Even then, she only stepped in far enough to help the boy inside. She looked over her shoulder once, wary. Her body was braced to flee even as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the dome was warm, modestly lit by wall panels and soft green grow lights that shimmered over rows of sprouting crops. The air was clean, if dry. A heater hummed in the corner beside an old cot lined with blankets. The space wasn't luxurious, but it was safe. The boy collapsed beside the cot without a sound. His breathing was shallow but even. The woman knelt beside him, checking his pulse, pressing her hand against his chest. She didn't cry, she didn't even tremble. Her face was numb with exhaustion. Grant moved quietly to the kitchen console and retrieved a ration tray. He added hot water, waited until it steamed, and carried it over. He crouched and set it beside her. "Thank you," she whispered, not looking up. Her voice cracked. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Grant stood and stepped back, letting her feed him. She cupped the spoon carefully, cooling each bite before touching it to the boy's lips. He took it slowly, lips parting, chewing with visible effort. Only when he had eaten half the tray did she allow herself to breathe. Grant returned to the stove and filled another tray. When he offered it to her, she took it wordlessly, fingers trembling. She didn't eat until the boy was asleep. Later, when the wind outside howled harder and the storm rattled the dome's exterior panels, the woman sat against the far wall, knees to her chest. Grant watched her from across the room but said nothing. She finally looked at him. "You live alone?" she asked. "I do. This is your dome. It was part of the old mining camp. I fixed what still worked." She nodded slowly. "Then you didn't take what I offered." "I'm not interested in buying people. That's not what I meant." "It is," he replied gently. "But you didn't want to offer it, you just thought you had to." She lowered her eyes. "Doesn't everyone?" No, they didn't speak for a long time after that. She fell asleep beside her son, not on the cot but on the floor, her body curled protectively around his. Grant offered her the bed. She declined with a quiet shake of her head. "Tomorrow," she said, "if it's still safe." Grant didn't argue. He lay down on the floor near the hatch, not out of suspicion, but to make sure she didn't feel watched. The silence that night felt different, not empty, not lonely, just full, like the dome had taken a deep breath and was holding it gently. He didn't sleep for hours, not because of fear, but because something in the world had changed. He wasn't alone anymore, and strangely, that didn't scare him. Grant awoke before the dome's lights adjusted to their morning hue. The storm was still raging outside. He could hear it thrumming against the reinforced panels like a muted drumbeat. He sat up slowly, careful not to make too much noise. Across the room, near the cot, the woman and child were still asleep, curled together beneath the thermal blanket he'd placed over them while they slept. She hadn't stirred when he approached earlier, hadn't reacted when he tucked the boy in a little tighter against her chest. That trust, or exhaustion, spoke louder than words. He moved to the hydroponic trays, checking nutrient flow and root depth. A small routine, something familiar. The kind of repetition that had kept him sane all these years. Today, though, it felt different. He was moving quieter, not wanting to disturb the air around her. She woke not long after, not with a start or a gasp, just a slow blink and a deeper breath. Her eyes adjusted quickly to the dim green and orange light of the dome interior. When she sat up, she didn't speak. Her hand instinctively found the boy's shoulder and hovered there until she felt the warmth of his breath. Only then did she look toward Grant. "I'm still here," she said softly. It wasn't a question. It sounded more like she was reminding herself. "You are." She ran a hand through her tangled hair and then over her face. "How long was I asleep?" 8 hours, he said. "More than you probably expected." "I thought I'd wake up outside again," she said. "Or locked in." "You're not." There was a silence between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She pulled the blanket up over the boy's shoulder and tucked it under his chin with careful, practiced fingers, the kind of touch that said everything. "He hasn't spoken in a long time," she said quietly. "Not properly. Some days I wonder if he remembers how." Grant crouched nearby, not too close, and reached into a crate. He pulled out a metal cup, filled it with warm water from the heating unit, and passed it to her. She accepted it with both hands, nodding once in thanks. "What's his name?" he asked. "Cairo," she replied. "Mine's Sierra." "Grant," she took a sip. "You don't ask a lot of questions. I figure you'll tell me what matters." She gave a quiet laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's rare." Grant sat across from her, careful to keep space between them. "How far did you walk?" 4 days, staring into the cup. "Northwest, through the Black Ridge Basin. We were with a group at first." She didn't say what happened to the group. "You have injury?" he asked. "Just exhaustion, bruises, starvation mostly. You'll need protein, salt. I'll take whatever you can spare and then we'll go." "You don't have to," he said. Sierra looked up sharply. "We don't want to overstay." Grant leaned back slightly. "There's no clock ticking here, no quota to meet." She studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. She was still trying to understand what kind of man he was, what angle he was playing. The problem was there wasn't one, and eventually her expression shifted, not trust exactly, but a softening. "Okay," she said, "one more day." That day passed in rhythm. Sierra helped where she could, sweeping the corners of the dome, organizing unused tools, gathering cloth for Cairo's sleeping space. Grant gave her room to move freely. He didn't instruct her, didn't correct her, and she noticed that. In the afternoon, Grant showed Cairo the hydroponic trays. The boy stared at the green shoots without blinking, as if he'd never seen something grow in front of him before. When Grant offered him a soft root to touch, the boy reached out and brushed it with his fingertips. He didn't speak, but he smiled. Sierra saw it and froze, her hand still holding a coil of wire she was organizing. Her mouth parted slightly. That's the first time he smiled in weeks. "Maybe the green reminded him of something," Grant said. They worked until dusk. That night, as the storm finally began to soften, Grant cooked a full meal: root mash, lentil stew, and some thin slices of preserved meat. He gave Cairo the softest portions, and the boy ate slowly but eagerly, still silent. Sierra ate too, slower but with growing hunger. She said thank you with her eyes more than her words. After dinner, Grant handed Sierra a clean undershirt and a pair of thermal pants, too big for her but better than her rags. She took them and disappeared behind the storage curtain to change. When she emerged, her violet skin looked cleaner, her silver markings more visible. She wore his shirt like armor, sleeves rolled, collar wide on her shoulders. She looked less like a ghost, more like a person again. She settled on the cot with Cairo beside her, the boy already drifting off. Grant sat across the room, reading by dim light. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." She looked at him long and hard. "Then you don't owe us anything." "I don't do this because I owe you." "Then why?" He closed the tablet, looked at her fully. "Because once someone let me in when I had nothing left. It saved me." Sierra blinked. She nodded once, then pulled the blanket higher. She whispered something to Cairo in a language Grant didn't recognize, then kissed his hair and lay beside him. That night the silence was peaceful, not hollow, not tense. Sometime after midnight, when the wind had completely died down and the dome's sensors returned to calm readings, Sierra's voice floated through the dark. "Do you think we could stay?" she asked. Grant didn't move. "If you want, I do." "Then stay," and she did. That was how it began. A story of trust, guarded wounds, and the slow thaw of fear. The morning after the storm was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. On Atrian 9, the absence of wind was like the absence of breath. The silence pressed down rather than lifted, like the land itself was still waiting to exhale. The dome's internal systems hummed softly, automated sensors detecting stable atmospheric conditions, while soft yellow morning light bled through the cracked overhead panels. Grant was already up, running a diagnostic on the filtration system. One of the airflow pumps had strained during the storm surge. Nothing critical, just a pressure imbalance, but he didn't like to let things sit when they were fixable. Maintenance gave him rhythm, control, predictability in a world where so much had once gone wrong. Behind him, he heard the rustle of a blanket and the sound of a small voice, not words, just the faint hum of movement and life. Cairo was awake. The boy sat cross-legged on the cot, blinking against the morning light, holding a piece of cloth like a comfort object, his small hands curling and uncurling around the edge. He didn't look at Grant, not directly, but his eyes tracked the tools on the bench and the quiet motions of Grant's hands. Sierra stirred next, her head rising slowly from the blanket beside him. Her long silver hair was tangled, pressed flat on one side. The oversized thermal shirt she changed into the night before hung off one shoulder, exposing the gentle shimmer of her violet skin beneath. She sat up carefully, blinking the last traces of sleep from her eyes, and immediately placed a hand on her son's back. still guarded, still alert. Grant didn't speak. He let them wake without intrusion. Instead, he filled a kettle and placed it over the low heat of the coil, adding a small pinch of dried leaf from a tin. The scent of the tea, earthy and a little bitter, drifted through the dome. "You always start this early?" Sierra asked, her voice hoarse from sleep. Grant glanced over his shoulder. "Only on days that end in Y." Sierra gave a soft huff of breath, not quite laughter, not quite indifference. She stood and stretched slowly, arms above her head, ribcage shifting beneath the thin fabric. Grant looked away quickly, not out of shame or prudishness, but out of respect. She noticed, and the subtle tightness in her shoulders eased just a little. Cairo yawned and rubbed his face against her side. She knelt beside him, brushed the boy's hair back from his forehead and kissed it. "He's not sick," she said. "Not that I can tell, just malnourished, dehydrated." "He'll be okay," Grant replied, "if he keeps eating." Sierra nodded, then turned to him. "Why haven't you asked?" "Asked what?" "Where we came from, who we were running from, why we were out there alone." Grant poured the tea into 2 metal cups. He set one on the table closest to her and kept the other for himself. "Because people who want to tell you things do," he said. "And people who've been forced to answer too many questions don't owe anyone their story." Sierra stared at him. Her fingers hovered over the cup but didn't touch it. "You think that makes you noble?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, just decent." A long silence stretched between them. "No one looks without wanting," she said finally, her voice low, eyes narrow. Grant met her gaze. "I look to understand, not to claim." Sierra sat down beside the cot, her arms circling Cairo. "That's not what most men mean when they say that." "I'm not most men." She studied him, hard, like she was trying to find the lie beneath his skin. She didn't, and that scared her more than if she had. The day unfolded in slow measures. Grant repaired the airflow pump. Sierra helped clean out the storage unit near the southern wall, organizing dried goods, separating salvage from scrap. Cairo wandered, silent, watching plants grow under artificial light, sometimes reaching out to touch the leaves with the delicate awe of a child who had forgotten what life looked like. Sierra worked with quiet precision. She asked no questions, took no shortcuts. She used her body deliberately, placing each foot, each lift of a crate with care. Grant noticed the faint stiffness in her gait, the way she favored her left leg. He didn't mention it. Around midday, he handed her a bottle of filtered water with electrolytes. She accepted it without comment and drank deeply. When she lowered the bottle, he said, "If something's bruised or torn, I've got medkits." "I've had worse," she said. "That's not the question." She met his eyes. There was a flicker of hesitation. "I'll let you know," she said finally. Later, Grant cooked lentil broth with crushed protein wafers and rehydrated greens. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food, and Sierra ate all of it. She fed Cairo first, then herself, always careful to let the boy finish what he could before touching her own bowl. "Does he talk to you?" Grant asked gently. "He used to," she replied. "He hummed, he used to sing, now not much." "Has he ever smiled?" Sierra looked across the room at her son. Cairo was curled near the grow beds, drawing lazy patterns in the dust on the floor. "Once yesterday," she said, "I noticed." Sierra exhaled, more air than sound. "I thought he'd never smile again." "You didn't give up." "I didn't have the luxury." That evening, while Cairo slept wrapped in a blanket near the heater, Sierra sat on the floor, arms around her knees, watching Grant work at his bench. He was repairing a corroded power coupling, his fingers steady and sure. "You're good with your hands," she said. "Had to be. You were military, technically Navy engineer. I built outposts, tended systems." "Why are you here?" Grant paused then. "Because the rest of the galaxy got too loud." Sierra tilted her head. "Too loud. Noise. Crowds, orders, people hurting each other for nothing. I didn't want to be part of that anymore." She nodded. "So you came here alone." "I thought I wanted to disappear. And now," he met her eyes, "now I think I was waiting." She didn't look away, her voice dropped. "For what?" "For someone who didn't want anything from me." Her throat tightened. "You don't know what I want." "I know what you don't want, and I won't ask for it." Sierra stood up slowly. She walked to the grow bed where Cairo lay asleep, checked his breath, then turned back to Grant. I've been traded, threatened, chased, she said. I've offered myself in exchange for food, protection, mercy. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't, but no one ever said I didn't have to offer anything. Grant's reply was quiet. Then let this be the first time. Sierra stared at him for a long moment. She crossed the room, not fast, not slow, and stopped just a few feet from where he stood. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. You don't have to trust me, he said. You just have to trust that you're safe. She nodded once, just barely, and then, as if testing the weight of silence itself, she took one step closer. Grant didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't breathe heavy. Sierra reached out, not to touch him, but to take the cup he'd left on the counter. Her fingers brushed his for the briefest second. Skin to skin. That was all, but it was enough. Where safety grows slowly, and the cost of survival finally begins to surface the days after the storm passed in measured quiet. Atrian 9 wind calmed to a sifting whisper, dragging dust across the dunes but no longer howling, no longer threatening to rip the dome apart. The sun emerged, muted behind a pale atmosphere, casting soft orange shadows over the cracked glass overhead. Within the dome, the world moved differently now, slower, steadier, more deliberate. Sierra hadn't left. Not after that first night. Not after Grant had offered her nothing in return for safety. She'd accepted food, warmth, and silence. And she'd stayed. But staying wasn't the same as resting. She still rose before sunrise, sweeping the floor with a salvaged fiber brush, sorting crates, coiling unused power lines, checking water levels with the quiet instinct of someone who had lived under rules where stillness was dangerous. She never asked for tasks. She simply did. Grant never told her to stop, but he watched, closely. It wasn't her efficiency that caught him. It was her rhythm, the way her shoulders never relaxed, the way her eyes flicked to corners and exits even while holding a spoon. She was always calculating something, routes, responses, fallback plans. Grant knew the signs. He'd seen them in people fresh from war, people who had learned somewhere along the line that breathing wasn't free. Cairo mirrored her, in his own way. The boy didn't speak, but he followed her with shadow-quiet steps. He watched her hands as she cleaned, her feet as she moved, as if learning a dance that meant the difference between survival and being caught. One morning, Grant handed him a data slate. It was an old model, powered by a kinetic cell. When swiped, the screen lit up with a simple children's story, a miner and her robot companion on a search for light crystals beneath the surface of a dying moon. No words yet, just images. Cairo stared, then slowly reached out. His small fingers hovered over the screen before he finally touched it. The image changed, the robot held out a hand to the miner. Cairo blinked, then touched again. Another image. The miner smiled. He made no sound, but his lips moved. Grant knelt beside him. "That's okay," he said quietly. "You can read out loud or not at all." Cairo didn't answer, but he kept swiping. Sierra saw it from across the dome. She had been folding clean towels, her back to the heater, when she looked up and stilled. For a moment she didn't move at all. Then she walked over, crouched beside her son, and gently placed her hand on his back. "He hasn't done that," she said, her voice thin. "Not since—" She didn't finish the sentence. Grant didn't press. "He's safe," Grant said instead. Sierra didn't respond, but her hand stayed on Cairo's back for a long time. That afternoon, while Cairo slept beside the grow beds with the slate cradled in his arms, Sierra helped Grant realign a damaged thermal vent outside the dome's rear module. She worked in silence, holding parts steady, watching how he handled the tools, how he read the pressure dials. "You were trained," she said eventually. "Terran Navy," he nodded, "terraforming engineer. Most of my career was spent fixing things for people who didn't know how to live without them. And now, I fix what matters to me." "You ever think of going back?" she asked. "To what?" She shrugged. "To people." "I am with people," he said. Then after a moment, "better ones." Sierra looked away, but she didn't argue. That evening they shared tea. Grant poured the bitter leaf brew into 2 small mugs and passed one across the table. Sierra accepted it with both hands. She always held things with both hands, as if letting go might mean losing them entirely. They sat in the warmth of the dome's heater coil. The night wind outside was soft, harmless now, brushing the structure with the hush of dry air and distant sand. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said suddenly. Grant looked up from his cup. "I didn't think we'd make it across the ridge." Cairo kept stumbling. "I had nothing left to feed him. My body was giving out." Grant said nothing. "And when I saw the dome lights," she continued, "I told myself, this is it. One last offer, one last trade." She looked directly at him now. "You didn't take it, you didn't even pause." "I'm not here to take things from people who have already lost too much." She stared at him. "I've had men say that before, and then later, I'm not them." "No," she said, "you're not." They drank in silence for a while, then Sierra said, "I can't read you. You don't need to. I know, that's what's confusing." The next day, Sierra asked to learn the water recycling system. Grant showed her. She listened carefully, memorized each valve, each pressure gauge. She asked smart questions, kept pace without overreaching. When she made a mistake, opened the wrong valve, she didn't flinch when the seal hissed. She simply corrected herself. "You're good at this," Grant said. "I used to keep atmospheric scrubbers running on a space station," she replied. "Which one?" "Delvex 3, before it was privatized." Grant nodded. "I know the name. Then you know what happened." "They sold half the crew. I was part of that half." He didn't speak. Sierra turned the valve again, carefully watching the pressure needle settle. "I was a technician, but that didn't matter. Cairo, born during transport," she said. "I kept him quiet, that's how we stayed alive." Grant swallowed. "I'm sorry. I don't want your pity. You don't have it." She looked up at him then, really looked. That night she didn't sleep on the cot. Instead, she laid her blanket down near the heater, close to where Grant kept his bedding. Not touching, but near. And when Grant woke in the middle of the night to the sound of quiet breathing beside him, he turned slightly. Sierra was lying on her side, facing him, eyes closed, one arm curled beneath her head. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't flinching. Her lips were relaxed, her jaw unclenched. She was sleeping, really sleeping. And for the first time, Grant understood the price she had paid to breathe. He reached out just slightly and adjusted the blanket over her shoulder. Then he lay back and let the silence hold them both. Where scars are seen, silence is shared. And the need to deserve care finally begins to unravel. The days settled into a rhythm that none of them dared to name. It wasn't peace exactly, and it wasn't routine in the way people on settled worlds understood it. But it was something close. Each morning came with soft light filtering through the worn dome panels, a light breeze outside that no longer screamed with dust, and the scent of soil, tea, and breathing that wasn't panicked. Cairo began humming again. It was quiet at first, barely a thread of sound, but it carried. A soft series of notes, scattered and uncertain, often while tracing his finger along the edges of the hydroponic trays or sitting in Grant's oversized shirt, cross-legged near the heater. When he stopped, his mouth would still move a little, as if sound was something he had to remember how to shape. Sierra noticed every time, and each time she did, she'd stop whatever she was doing, fixing a filter, brushing her hair, folding towels, and just listen. The stillness in her was different when he made noise. Not fear, not tension, something else. As if she were holding her breath, afraid she might wake from a dream that didn't punish her for wanting too much. Grant never commented on it. He just kept moving, kept fixing things, kept being there. It was a kind of language, one that didn't require much more than presence. That morning, Sierra found him sitting at the workbench with a tangled cluster of wires and burned-out connectors, a salvaged comm unit. She crouched beside him, tilting her head to study it. "Trying to call someone?" she asked, voice soft. "Trying to listen," he replied. "Anyone still out there?" "Mostly static, sometimes weather telemetry from old mining satellites. A few commercial bursts, nothing personal." She leaned on the edge of the table, her fingers brushing the edge of a cracked display panel. "What would you say if someone did answer?" Grant didn't respond right away. He adjusted a capacitor and rewired a corroded port. "Probably nothing," he said eventually. "If they were smart, they wouldn't trust the silence either." Sierra gave a slow nod. Then she reached over and held out her palm. "Let me try." Grant handed her the multi-tool. She stripped the wire casing, exposed the frayed copper, and began carefully threading a new solder line. Her fingers were steady, confident. "You've done this before," he said. She smiled, a small thing. "You don't survive on scavenger routes without knowing how to hotwire life support. I could use the help. You've had it." "No," he said. "I mean now, for good." Sierra stilled, her shoulders tensed but not in fear, more like disbelief. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm telling you it's safe to." She handed him the multi-tool again and stood. "Safe is expensive," she said. "I'm still not sure what the price is." "There isn't one." She stared down at him. Her voice was lower now, raw. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because I don't believe people like you exist." "Then stay until you do." She walked away without answering, but she didn't go far, just over to the grow beds where Cairo had begun poking his finger into the soft moss near the roots of a new protein sprout. That night they ate in silence again, root cakes, boiled grains, and a little sweet paste Grant had made from the last of the dried fruit. Cairo licked his fingers clean. Sierra leaned against the heater, legs folded beneath her, watching the flames behind the coil. "I've been thinking," she said. Grant glanced up. "Maybe I don't want to earn things anymore." He paused, then put his cup down. "You never had to." "That's not how I was raised," she said. "How were you raised?" "Not with kindness." She looked at him now, her silver-streaked violet eyes sharp under the low dome light. "You act like people deserve shelter, that they deserve warmth and food and rest." "They do." "No," she said firmly. "They don't. They survive, they steal, they trade, they beg, they bleed, but deserve, that's not how the world works." Grant didn't argue. He stood, walked to the side locker, and pulled out an old emergency blanket. He unfolded it slowly and draped it over the cot where Cairo had fallen asleep. Then he turned back to her. "You're wrong," he said quietly. Sierra raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" "I used to think the same way," he continued. "I saw men die in places that forgot they existed. I watched people sell pieces of themselves to stay alive, but I also watched someone once pull me from that without a price, just because." She said nothing. "That's why I'm here," Grant said. "Because she taught me it's not about earning kindness. It's about being human enough to offer it." Sierra swallowed, her throat working hard. "And what happened to her?" "She died," he said, "before I could say thank you." The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward, not forced. Real. Sierra got up, crossed the space between them, and sat beside him on the bench, not touching, just close enough that her knee brushed his. After a while she whispered, "Thank you." He didn't ask what for. Later that night, when the dome lights dimmed and the last maintenance check was logged into the terminal, Sierra curled into her bedding near the heater again. But she didn't wrap herself tight this time. She left one edge of the blanket open. An invitation. Grant lay down a few feet away, as always. "Can I ask something?" she murmured. "Of course." "If I stay here, if this becomes real, will you ever expect more?" He turned his head toward her in the dark. "I expect you to sleep well, to feel safe, to raise your son without running, that's it. No touching, not unless you want it, no claiming. I'm not here to own anyone." Sierra nodded, then she rolled to face him. "Good," she whispered. And that night, for the first time, her hand reached out in the dark and found his. Fingers intertwined. No promises, no exchanges, just the warmth of someone choosing not to sleep alone, where comfort becomes trust, and the warmth between two survivors begins to bloom. The nights had stopped feeling dangerous. Sierra hadn't said it aloud, and neither had Grant, but something had changed. There was no moment where the shift had come, no grand declaration, no dramatic pause in time. But it was there, embedded in the way she no longer flinched when the heater cycled too loud, or how Cairo had started humming as he fell asleep beside the hydroponic trays. It was in the small, unnoticed things. The smell of fresh thermal paste when Grant serviced the air scrubber. The soft, almost human way the dome's environmental system sighed before sunrise. The fact that Sierra didn't check the exit routes every morning anymore. That morning, she was already up when Grant rolled off his cot, stretching the stiffness from his back. She was near the storage unit, brushing her fingers along a row of recycled jars. Her hair was loosely tied behind her head, a few silver strands catching the filtered dome light. She wore one of Grant's undershirts again, soft from repeated washings, and thermal pants rolled several times at the waist. She had made them her own. Cairo was asleep still, his small body curled on a thick folded blanket, clutching the data slate in one arm like a pillow. Sierra turned when she heard Grant move. She didn't speak right away, but she smiled. It was small, barely lifting the corners of her mouth, but it was real, unforced. Grant nodded toward the kettle. "Want tea?" "Always." He poured the last of the leaf shavings into the strainer. The water hissed as it reached a boil, and a warm, earthy aroma filled the dome. Sierra stepped up beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. "Do you ever miss talking?" she asked suddenly. Grant looked at her, puzzled. "I talk plenty." "No," she said. "I mean the kind of talking where everything matters, where someone listens because they want to, not because they are waiting for a reason to run." Grant stirred the tea. "I've learned that silence can be louder than words," he said, "but yeah, sometimes I miss it." Sierra accepted the cup he handed her and sipped carefully. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice soft. "About this place, about staying." Grant felt his breath catch slightly, but he said nothing. Sierra turned to face him fully. Her eyes were open in a way they hadn't been before, no guarded calculation, no flinch behind them. Just clear, reflective honesty. "I don't know what kind of person I am when I'm not surviving," she said. "When I'm not bargaining with myself over what to give up next." "You don't have to know," Grant said. "You get to figure it out here. And if I don't like who I find, then we figure it out together." Sierra stepped a little closer. Her hand was still wrapped around the mug, but her fingers brushed against his as she lowered it to the table. "You keep saying we, even when I don't ask you to." Grant met her gaze. "I've been alone long enough to know that when the chance comes to not be, you don't wait for permission to mean it." Her eyes lingered on his. Then she said, "I'll stay if you ask me to." Grant didn't move, but he didn't look away. "I want you to stay," he said. "I want both of you to stay." That was all, but it was enough. That night the dome was quiet. Cairo had fallen asleep early, curled beneath the blanket with his data slate still glowing faintly. Sierra had washed up behind the storage curtain, and when she emerged, her hair was damp and curling at the ends. She wore only the long undershirt, the hem brushing her thighs, her feet bare against the smooth floor. Grant was sitting near the heater, turning a salvaged wire loop through his fingers. He looked up when he heard her. Sierra walked toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. "I want to ask something," she said. "Okay. When you look at me, do you want me?" Grant's throat tightened, but he answered steadily. "I want you, but I won't take, not unless you want me to." Sierra stood in front of him for a long moment. Then she knelt, gently removed the wire from his hand, and placed her palm against his chest. "I don't want to be touched like I'm owed," she said. "I want to be touched like I'm enough." "You are," he whispered. She leaned forward slowly, her forehead resting against his. Her breath was soft against his mouth. He didn't move. He didn't claim. He let her lead. When she kissed him, it wasn't frantic or desperate. It was deliberate, a slow unfolding of something buried for too long. Her hands found his shoulders, his ribs, the line of his neck. She pressed herself against him, not with urgency, but with need. Need for closeness, for warmth, for proof that she could choose this without being punished for it. Grant responded with equal care. His hands moved to her waist, then to her back, fingers sliding under the loose fabric to the warm skin beneath. They kissed again, longer this time, breath hitching, bodies drawing closer. Sierra shifted onto his lap, straddling him gently, her legs curling around his. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She moved with the grace of someone remembering what it meant to be wanted without danger. When they undressed each other, it was slow, every touch intentional, every piece of clothing removed like an offering of trust. They lay together on the blankets near the heater, the low orange light casting shadows across the soft curves of her back, the faint silver streaks glowing along her spine. There was no script, no performance, just warmth, touch, breath. Their bodies met in silence, moving together in the quiet rhythm of people who had waited a long time to feel safe inside another's arms. Sierra's fingers curled against Grant's chest, his hand on her hip anchoring her to the moment. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Every inhale, every pause, every sigh between them said more than words ever could. And when it was over, they didn't move apart. She curled against him, her head tucked beneath his chin, her leg draped across his. "I didn't think I could want anything ever again," she whispered. "Not like this, not slow, not soft." "You can," Grant said. "You just did." She smiled against his skin. "I want this," she whispered. "All of it, you, him, here." Grant kissed the top of her head. "Then stay." "I already did." The next morning was still and soft. Sierra woke first, nestled against Grant's chest. His arm was wrapped around her waist, their legs still tangled beneath the blanket. She didn't move right away. She just listened to the hum of the scrubbers, the rhythm of his breathing, the silence that no longer scared her. She reached up and touched his jaw gently. "You're still here," she murmured. His eyes opened. "Where else would I be?" Sierra smiled. They rose together, quietly dressing, brushing off the dust from their clothes. When Cairo woke and found them preparing breakfast side by side, he smiled too, shy and quiet, but unmistakably joyful. Later that day, Sierra helped Grant replace a broken UV light above the southern grow tray. As he tightened the final bolt, she handed him a fresh cloth to wipe the grease from his hands. He didn't take it immediately. Instead, he turned to her, took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "You don't have to give me anything to stay," he said. She nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to." That night they slept together again, not in fear, not in debt, but in presence. When they kissed beneath the dome light, with the sound of their child breathing nearby, it wasn't because of survival. It was because they were finally learning what it meant to live. Where a home becomes real, danger looms from memory, and the bond they've chosen is put to the test. The dome no longer smelled like solitude. The air still carried traces of clean soil and recycled water, but now it also held the faint aroma of herbs drying on string lines, the warmth of shared breath, and the occasional note of laughter, quiet, rare, but undeniably alive. Life hadn't just returned to Grant's corner of Atrian 9. It had made itself known. Cairo spoke his first full sentence 5 days after Sierra and Grant had shared their first night together. They were tending the western grow trays, planting a fresh set of nutrient-rich starters. Sierra was crouched, smoothing soil, while Grant showed Cairo how to press the seed pod into the damp grooves. Cairo stared at it for a long time, chewing his lower lip, fingers hovering above the pod. Grant didn't push. He just waited, steady, patient. Finally, Cairo whispered, "Can I do it?" The words were gravelly with disuse, but unmistakable. Sierra froze. Grant smiled softly. "Yes, you can." The boy pressed the pod into the soil with both hands. When he looked up, Sierra had tears in her eyes. Not dramatic ones, just the kind that built from quiet hope finally realized. She didn't cry out loud. She just reached over and pulled Cairo close, holding him for a long time. That night when Sierra lay in bed beside Grant, her head on his chest, she said, he was silent for almost a year. Grant didn't answer. He just placed his hand over hers, fingers slipping between her knuckles. "I thought he might never talk again," she whispered. "I thought I'd ruined him." "You didn't," Grant said. "He just needed a place he didn't have to hide." Sierra closed her eyes. "We all did." They began making changes to the dome, not just functional ones, but choices that made it theirs. Cairo asked for a curtain to divide his sleeping area. Sierra stitched it from insulation fabric. Grant built a small table out of crate wood where Cairo could draw or eat or build his strange little sculptures out of broken wiring and pebbles. Sierra arranged the kitchen space. She labeled storage drawers with small symbols, her native script for some, Grant's language for others. They laughed at the confusion, compromised on shorthand. When she found a metal canister of old Terran spice blend, she nearly cried from the memory of it. Grant used it that night in a stew neither of them could name, but all three of them devoured in silence. There were no rules in this new rhythm, but there was trust, and in that trust they flourished. One morning Grant noticed the change. It wasn't something obvious, no alarm, no comm signal, no tremor in the ground. It was in the air, a pressure shift too subtle for most to notice. He checked the perimeter sensors, the atmospheric readers, the long-range motion scans, all stable. But he'd been a soldier once, an engineer deployed to hostile worlds. He knew how tension crept into systems before anyone else did. When Sierra found him staring at the data terminal, brow furrowed, she didn't ask. She just stood beside him and waited. He finally said, "Something's off." She tilted her head. "How?" "I don't know, but I've felt this before." Sierra nodded once, then turned away and quietly began packing a satchel, water, rations, a tool, a flare, a blanket. No panic, no question, just instinct. "You think someone's coming?" she asked. "I hope not," Grant replied. That night the wind returned. Not in a storm, not yet, but in restless currents scraping across the dome like the fingers of something searching. Grant checked the seals twice. Sierra didn't sleep. Cairo, unaware, curled into his blanket and dreamed quietly beside his light pad. When dawn came, it brought silence again. But it wasn't the calm they'd known. It was waiting. By mid-morning, proximity sensor blinked. Grant and Sierra stood over the monitor together. A single ping, faint, then gone. "Could be a creature," Grant offered. "Or a drone," Sierra said. Grant looked at her. "Someone from your past," she exhaled. "Maybe." She didn't say more, but she pulled her son a little closer that night. They waited 3 days. No further signals, no contact, no movement, but the tension stayed. On the 4th day, while Grant repaired a cracked intake vent outside, Sierra came to him holding a small object in her hand. A tag, a slaver beacon, old, corroded, half-burned, but unmistakable. She set it in his hand. "They used these," she said, "to mark us. If this was near the ridge line, someone left it there or dropped it while tracking." Grant felt a chill. "Someone's looking." "I don't think they are here yet," she said, "but they will be." Grant stood in silence for a long time. Then, "We'll be ready." That night she asked him, "Would you run with us?" He looked over at her from across the bed. "You'd leave." "If I thought it meant Cairo would be safe." Grant reached across the space and took her hand. "This isn't just a place to escape from anymore," he said. "It's one you chose." She closed her fingers around his. "That's why it matters." They made quiet preparations, reinforced the airlock, changed the lock codes, moved supplies to hidden compartments beneath the floor, taught Cairo to listen for the soft beep of the emergency signal. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. Sierra kept her voice calm, but Grant could see it in her, the coiling fear, the old wounds rising again, not because she didn't trust him, but because she trusted him enough to be afraid of losing this. Late one night, as the wind howled again and static whispered through the old comm unit, Sierra whispered, "I've run so long I don't know how to stay still." "You don't have to," Grant said. "You just have to know you're not running alone." She moved toward him then, slow, deliberate. She lay against him, skin to skin, and let the silence fold over them like a shelter of its own. The threat didn't come the next day, or the next, but it stayed in the air. And when it did come, a single ship, dull and gray, landing 2 kilometers east of the ridge, they knew. Grant watched it through the old scope. He saw the figures moving 2, maybe 3, armored, not military, not rescue. Sierra stood beside him, spine straight. "That's them." "They'll scan," Grant said. "They'll find us." He turned to her. "Not unless I let them." She gripped his arm. "No one has to die for this. No one will." But they both knew that wasn't a promise anyone could make. They waited. And when the knock finally came, not at the hatch but the outer dome panel, it was gentle, intentional. Grant walked to the intercom. Sierra stood behind him, one hand on Cairo's shoulder, who clutched her leg in silence. A voice crackled through. "Shelter command. This is Locator Unit Delta. We're searching for 2 escaped assets. One female, Caliph bloodline, one juvenile, unknown status." Sierra's jaw tightened. Cairo's grip clenched. Grant pressed the button. "No one like that here." Pause. "We have reason to believe they entered this sector." "Then your reason is wrong." Another pause. "We'll scan for residual signatures. You'll find hydroponics, soil, and a man who doesn't like visitors." Then silence. Long, heavy silence. "Then we'll log this as unconfirmed. Recommend further sweep." Grant didn't move until the signal dropped. When he turned, Sierra was staring at him, breath caught, eyes wide. "You lied," she said. "No," he said softly. "I told them what they didn't deserve to know." They left. The ship lifted off without fanfare, but Grant didn't rest easy until the signal vanished completely. And when he finally sat down, muscles aching, heart still pounding, Sierra sat beside him. "I've never had someone stand in front of me like that," she whispered. "You shouldn't have had to wait this long." She leaned in, kissed him hard, kissed him like someone who had almost lost what mattered. Then she whispered against his mouth, "I choose this, not as an escape, as home." And for the first time, Grant believed they might actually keep it. Where old wounds resurface, fears are tested, and love learns how to laugh without forgetting the dome held its breath after the ship left. For a full day, maybe two, no one spoke of it. Grant still checked the sensors every 2 hours. Sierra kept Cairo close, even during routine chores. Cairo, for his part, said nothing about the men who came knocking. But he stopped humming. And the data slate sat untouched beside his cot, the story of the robot miner frozen mid-frame. There was no confrontation, no battle, no smoke or alarms, but the intrusion left something behind, a shadow that curled into corners and settled behind their eyes. They tried to shake it. On the third morning, Grant added extra sweetroot to the breakfast mash. Cairo wrinkled his nose, then giggled when Sierra pretended to be shocked by the taste. It was the first sound of joy he'd made in 3 days. Grant smiled so hard it made his jaw hurt. Later that day, Grant went to clean the air vents and found Sierra already on the ladder, her legs tucked under her, arms deep in the panel. "You're supposed to let me do the dirty work," he said. She grunted. "You're too slow. I'm methodical. You're stubborn." He looked up at her. "You like that about me?" She glanced down with a sly grin. "That's still up for review." When she climbed down, she nearly tripped. He caught her waist mid-stumble, and for a moment they stood close, her chest brushing his, her hands resting on his shoulders. Then she leaned in, kissed him once on the cheek, soft, quick, and walked off muttering, "Still slow." Grant laughed. It felt good to laugh again. That night, with Cairo fast asleep and the dome warm and dim, Sierra stood near the heater brushing out her hair with an old carbon fiber comb Grant had salvaged for her. Her long silver strands caught the glow like living silk. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said without turning. "Of course. Do you ever wonder what you would have been if things had gone differently?" Grant looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I used to think I was meant to fix things that mattered, people, places, worlds, but every time I tried I was told it wasn't my place." She turned around slowly. "And now, I fix this," he said, gesturing around them. "Us. It's the only thing I've ever worked on that didn't feel like a job." She stepped closer. "So I'm your favorite project." He smirked. "You're the only one who talks back." She laughed, a real, sudden sound. Her hand went to her mouth like she wasn't used to hearing it. Grant grinned. "There it is again." "What?" "That sound, you should do it more." She tilted her head. "You're ridiculous." He bowed. "You've figured me out." She stepped into him then, arms circling his waist, her head resting against his chest. He held her tightly, gently, swaying them just slightly in the still warmth of the dome. Her body relaxed fully for the first time in days. "You make me feel," she whispered, "like I'm allowed to take up space." "You are. No one's ever told me that before." "Well," he said softly, kissing her hair, "get used to hearing it." The next day the water purifier jammed. Grant cursed under his breath as he dug into the wiring harness. Sierra stood nearby, one hand on her hip, watching him with amused disapproval. "You know," she said, "I've seen children repair faster than this." He shot her a look. "Did those children do it while 3 days behind on sleep?" She smirked. "No, they napped like reasonable people." He chuckled, but his fingers trembled slightly on the wire clamp. Sierra's smile faded. "Grant," she asked, "when's the last time you rested?" He sighed. "Since before the ship, I've been on edge." She knelt beside him. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not." "Yes, you are," she said, placing a hand on his wrist. "You're carrying everything, me, Cairo, the dome, the sensors, the fear." He didn't answer. She leaned in, touching her forehead to his. "We can carry it together. You don't have to fix me, you just have to stay." His shoulders finally loosened. They sat like that, knees pressed, wires forgotten for a moment. Just two people who had learned to keep going even when their legs wanted to fold. Later, as he rested finally, actually rested, stretched out with his eyes closed, Sierra sat beside him and whispered, "You know, I was taught that broken things had no value." He opened one eye, and now, "I look around this place," she said, "and I see broken panels, cracked glass, scorched metal, and it holds us, protects us. It's not perfect, but it works." He opened both eyes now, looking up at her. "I think maybe I'm the same." He reached up and took her hand. "You're not broken." "I am," she said, "but that doesn't mean I'm useless." He nodded slowly. "Ruins don't mean you're worthless, they just mean you've survived." She smiled. "I like that," she said. That evening, Cairo surprised them both. He walked over while they were sitting together near the grow beds and held up one of his wire sculptures, a twisted loop with 3 circles in the center. He pointed to one. "That's me," he said quietly, then the next, "Mama," then the last, "Grant." Sierra's hand went to her mouth. Grant crouched, eyes wide. "Is that, are we all in there?" Cairo nodded. "It's us." Grant took the sculpture carefully. "Thank you," he said, "this is perfect." Cairo nodded again, then walked away as if nothing unusual had happened. Sierra stared after him. Grant placed a hand on her back. "He knows," he said. She turned to him. "So do I." That night she joined him in bed again, curling under the blanket, her arm resting across his chest. "You really want all of this?" she asked. "The ruins, the trauma, the baggage." He kissed her forehead. "I want everything that makes you real." She smiled against his skin. "Then I guess you're stuck with me." "I was hoping you'd say that." Where the past knocks again, but this time, they stay. The weather shifted again in the second month. The sky darkened 3 days early and the winds came back, not the scouring, aimless gusts of the high plains, but something more deliberate, more organized. Grant watched the readouts from the dome's terminal. The atmospheric pressure dropped and the sky turned bronze red with static charge. A storm was coming. But they didn't panic. They had lived through worse. Sierra helped him check the seals. Cairo gathered small bundles of dry supplies and moved them to the inner storage unit without even being told. The family worked like muscle memory, quiet, efficient, prepared. When the outer winds began to howl, the 3 of them stood at the main hatch for a moment, just listening. Then Grant sealed the locks, and the storm passed around them like a wave breaking over a rock. "You ever wonder if you're just waiting for the next hit?" Ira asked that night, her body curled against Grant's beneath the blanket. Outside, the wind howled like a creature left behind. Grant didn't answer immediately. He ran his fingers along the soft skin of her back, trailing the faint silver streaks she now let show freely. "Sometimes," he said. "But lately I wonder if I've already taken the worst of it and I just didn't know it." She tilted her head, cheek resting against his shoulder. "What do you mean?" He exhaled. "Living alone for so long, thinking that was peace, that silence was strength." She looked at him, and now, "I think peace is when someone says your name because they want to, not because they need something." Her lips parted slightly. "Say mine, Sierra." Again, he smiled. "Sierra." She kissed his collarbone softly. "That sounds like home." They began making jokes. Not the kind born from survival or gallows humor, but the light, dumb kind that made no sense to anyone else but made them laugh until Cairo rolled his eyes and groaned. Sierra started calling Grant Captain Dirt after he slipped on irrigation mud and fell flat while adjusting a grow light. "You'd better watch it," he said, rubbing his back. "Or what?" she teased. "I'll demote you to assistant mud engineer." Sierra grinned. "Joke's on you. I've already been promoted to domestic goddess." "Correction," Grant said, pointing at the half-burned stew pot from 2 nights ago. "You're on probation." "Mutiny," she gasped. Cairo started drawing cartoons on the slate, stick figures of Grant with mud on his face. One of Sierra flying a spaceship that looked like a teapot, and himself as a space lizard. He wouldn't explain that one. They laughed together, and that made the next knock at the hatch even worse. It came on the second night of the storm. A slow, deliberate thud, not urgent, not panicked. Grant and Sierra locked eyes across the dome. Cairo had already hidden behind the curtain near the sleeping corner, silent as breath. Grant approached the terminal. Single motion alert, no comm request, no ship in sensor range. He looked through the external cam. What he saw made his blood turn cold. It was a woman, alone, ragged, holding something bundled in her arms, not a weapon, something small, breathing, another child. Grant hesitated. Sierra stepped beside him. "What is it?" he motioned. She looked. The moment she saw the woman, Sierra's breath hitched. "She's one of us," she said. Grant didn't ask how she knew. He opened the hatch without another word. The woman collapsed almost immediately, catching herself just before her knees hit the floor. Her skin was pale, cracked with cold. Her hair hung in wet clumps soaked by the rain outside. The child in her arms, barely a toddler, was whimpering weakly. Sierra moved first. She grabbed a blanket, wrapped the child, then helped lower the woman to the floor near the heater. Grant fetched a water pack and ration box. Crouching beside them, the woman's eyes fluttered open, her voice cracked. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," Sierra said firmly. "You're safe now." The woman blinked at her. "You're Caliph." "I am." The woman managed a breath of a laugh. "Then I really found it, the place they say doesn't turn people away." Sierra looked at Grant. "How far did you walk?" 3 days, the woman whispered. "From the old relay ridge. They found our transport. We ran. Everyone else gone." Grant pressed a warm cup into her hand. She drank with trembling fingers. "Why come here?" Sierra asked. "They said a man and a Caliph woman shelter near the storm line, that he doesn't ask questions, that she doesn't run." Sierra knelt beside her, hand on the woman's shoulder. "They were right," she said. "The dome changed again after that, not structurally, emotionally. Cairo and the toddler, her name was Ryan, became inseparable. They played beside the grow beds, stacking rocks and chasing bugs that wandered in through the vent filters. Ryan didn't speak much, but she watched everything with wide, unblinking eyes." Sierra helped the woman, whose name was Mira, recover. She moved slowly, but she was strong. A miner, like so many of them had been once, abandoned by the Corps that had extracted her usefulness. She didn't ask to stay, but Grant gave her a cot anyway. One night, after the storm had finally passed and the sky began to clear again, Sierra stood outside the dome with Grant, watching the wind die. She was barefoot, toes sinking into the soft dirt, arms folded against the cooling air. He stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her hip. "I used to think every storm meant running," she said quietly. Grant glanced at her. "Now I think storms just test if we're ready to stay." He kissed her temple. "You passed." "No," she said. "We did." She turned to face him fully, slid her arms around his waist. "And when the next one comes, we'll pass again." He rested his forehead to hers. Together. They lay together that night in silence, listening to the hum of the recyclers, the soft shuffle of 2 children breathing in their sleep. Sierra's hand found his in the dark, and with her voice steady, sure, she whispered, "I don't just feel safe anymore." Grant turned slightly. "No, I feel like I belong." He held her tighter, and when sleep came, it didn't come like escape, it came like home, where love becomes more than safety, and the past no longer defines who she is. Rain fell again, but this time it felt different. Not like warning, not like danger. The drops tapped softly on the outer dome like a rhythm only the earth remembered. Sierra stood in it barefoot, hood down, arms slightly out, eyes closed. She let it touch her, let it run over her shoulders and into her open palms. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Inside the dome, Grant watched her through the viewport. He didn't interrupt. There were still things she needed to do alone. It had been 5 weeks since Mira and Ryan arrived. The rhythm had changed again, more meals, more noise, more warmth. Cairo had started calling Grant boss, a nickname born of a game they played with the grow lights and which quickly stuck. Ryan followed Cairo like a shadow. She didn't speak often, but she smiled when he did, and laughed when Grant made silly faces across the table. Sierra laughed more now too. But there were nights she still sat awake while Grant slept, tracing old scars on her wrists, quiet and still. Not with shame, but with remembrance. The past hadn't left her, but it didn't control her anymore. That morning she came back inside soaked to the skin, droplets still clinging to her lashes. She peeled off the outer layers, dried her face, and padded over to the central heater where Grant was sealing a new panel to cover the vent system. He didn't look up. "Did it help?" he asked. Yes, she said. He offered her the last piece of bread. She tore it in half and handed him one back. They sat together, chewing slowly. Then she asked, "What did they call you before all of this?" He raised an eyebrow. "You mean my name?" "I mean the name that mattered." He paused, thinking. "My call sign used to be Mender," he said finally, "because no matter how wrecked the mission got, I could patch it up enough to get us out alive." Sierra smiled. "Mender, that fits." Grant glanced at her. "And you, what did they call you?" She looked away, her voice dropped. "Asset, breeder, variant class 12, sometimes just girl, never Sierra." Grant reached out and touched her hand. "They were wrong." She nodded, lips pressed together. He leaned in. "Let me give you a name." Her eyes widened. "I already have one." "You chose Sierra, you survived with it, but I want to give you one that means something here, with us, with me." She hesitated. "What kind of name?" Grant looked down at her hands, calloused but graceful. Then at her eyes, silver gray with flecks of violet, always watching, always absorbing. Then he whispered, "Amory." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "In Old Terran it means promised. In the dialect my grandmother spoke, it means the one who stays." Sierra inhaled slowly. "That's beautiful," she said. "You don't have to take it, but I wanted you to have it. A name that wasn't stolen, branded, or buried." She turned his palm over and kissed it. "Say it again." "Amory." She closed her eyes. "Then that's who I'll be to you." That night they celebrated, not formally. There were no candles or speeches. Just stew, warm bread, Mira's surprisingly decent fermented herb drink, and two sleeping children curled near the heater while laughter filled the dome. They played a simple music file from an old salvaged unit, something slow and sweet from a human colony Grant couldn't remember the name of. Sierra Amory now stood in the center of the room and held out her hand. "Dance with me." Grant chuckled. "I'm not sure I remember how. I'll teach you." He stepped into her arms. They swayed gently, feet shifting across the floor with practiced awkwardness. She led at first, then he did. Then they moved together as if they'd always known how. "You're light," he said. "You're warm," she replied. "I'm in love with you." She stilled, then looked up. "You mean it?" "Completely." She pressed her forehead to his. "I've been waiting to hear that since the first day you looked at me like I wasn't a problem to solve." He smiled. "You never were." Later, when the music faded and the fire dimmed, they lay curled together beneath the blanket, her fingers on his chest. "I don't feel like Sierra anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to be." "I feel reborn, like the storm carved away the parts that didn't belong." "Storms do that," he said. "They don't just destroy, sometimes they reveal." She kissed his throat gently. "Then let this be my name now, yours to say, yours to keep." He held her tighter, Amory, and for the first time in her life it felt like truth. The next morning Cairo approached Grant while Amory tended the hydro lines. He pointed to his mother. "Why is she smiling more now?" Grant knelt beside him. "Because she feels safe." Cairo tilted his head. "She said that before." Grant smiled. "Now she believes it." Cairo nodded. "She told me she has a new name." Grant tousled his hair. "She does. Can I have one too?" Grant raised an eyebrow. "Don't like Cairo." Cairo shrugged. "I like it, but maybe I want one that means something here." Grant looked out across the dome, then said, "What about Ali?" Cairo considered it. "What does it mean?" In one of the old languages, Grant said, "It means lifted from the dust." Cairo grinned, "Illy." And just like that he became someone new too. Amory laughed when she heard. "Grant's renaming the whole household," she teased. Grant smirked. "Only if you let me." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Then call me yours." Where they no longer survive just to exist, but live as if the future truly belongs to them, the dome looked different by spring. Not because the walls had changed, or the sky above had softened, but because the people inside it had. There were things growing in the soil now that hadn't dared sprout before. A small patch of flowering stalks near the rear ventilation. A creeping vine that Mira had coaxed out of dormancy with heat lamps and care. Even a cluster of yellow-edged root bulbs that Ali, formerly Cairo, swore he'd bred into a new variant entirely, with help from Ryan, who now followed him like a second heartbeat. And in the center of it all, Amory knelt in the morning sun, her hands dirty, her hair braided down her back, humming softly. She was no longer afraid of the dome. She was part of it. Grant had reinforced the ceiling panels, added a heat reflector, and repurposed 2 collapsed sensor drones into kinetic light sources. The dome now glowed with a soft pulse in the evening's warm amber ripples that moved like breath along the inside curve of the walls. "You turned this place into art," Amory told him one evening as they lay beneath the lights with Ryan and Ellie curled together beside the heater. "I just wanted to make it feel alive," he said. "You did." She rested her head on his chest. "I used to think safety meant being invisible," she whispered. "But here it feels like being seen." Grant kissed her temple. "That's because you are." They still kept watch, still scanned the horizon, still taught the kids how to hide if they had to. Survival wasn't a forgotten word, but it wasn't the only one anymore. Now there were others: laughter, learning, building, teasing, healing, and more than anything, choosing. Amory planted vines not because she had to, but because she wanted to see something climb. Mira began welding again, scraps at first, then tools, then things of beauty, small figures, a weather vane, a spinner shaped like a bird that whistled in the wind. Grant repaired an old rover. The children helped him paint it with bright blue streaks and handprints. They named it Echo because it always brought something back. One morning, Amory stood at the southern ridge looking down at the valley. She wore the coat Grant had sewn for her from salvaged synth leather and woven insulation panels. Her hair whipped in the breeze. The horizon glowed gold. Grant came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "We could build another dome down there. Let the kids grow their own space when they're older." He chuckled. "You're already planning colonies." She grinned. "You started it." They stood like that for a long time. Then she said, "Do you remember when I first knocked on your door?" "I do. I thought it was just for one night." "I know. And now," he turned her gently until they faced each other. "Now," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear, "every night is still yours." She leaned in and kissed him slowly. "Then let's not waste any of them." That evening the family ate by lantern light. Mira told a story about her father mining beneath frozen seas on another world. Grant laughed so hard he knocked over his cup. Ellie pretended to be annoyed and dramatically mopped the spill with a sock, earning a full-bodied laugh from Ryan. Amory sat watching it all. No part of her flinched anymore. No shadow whispered she didn't belong. Because she did. After the children fell asleep and Mira turned in, Grant and Amory stepped outside. The air was clear, the stars vast and wide. He took her hand. "I've never asked," he said, "but if you ever wanted to leave, if another world opened up," she turned to face him. "I wouldn't," she said. "Why?" "Because I've already found what I ran from world to world looking for." He touched her cheek. "What's that?" "A place that didn't want me to be anything but mine." She stepped closer, "And people who looked at the pieces of me and didn't flinch." He kissed her then, slow, certain. And when they pulled apart, she whispered, "This isn't yours, it isn't mine." Grant nodded. "All of it is ours." That night, under the soft light of the rebuilt dome, they made love again, not desperate, not hidden, but open and unhurried. A rhythm born of trust and time. Her fingers found the lines of his shoulder. His mouth found the curve of her throat. Their bodies moved not out of fear, but out of the safety they had grown together. She whispered his name and he whispered hers, Amory, like it was a vow every time. And when they finally lay together afterward, their breathing slowed and tangled, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. Not from pain, not from fear, but because joy had always felt too sharp to hold, and now it was soft, gentle, real. A few weeks later, Grant carved the names into the inside wall of the dome, carefully, one by one. Grant Varen, Amory, Illy, Ryan, Mira. He used the tip of a thermal chisel, took his time. When he finished, he called them all in. "This," he said, pointing, "isn't just a place." They stood together side by side. "It's a home," Amory said. He smiled, and beneath their feet the soil stayed warm, the air stayed steady. The lights above them glowed like stars that had chosen not to leave. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were something more. They were a family, and all of it was theirs.